Hello and welcome back to Ohio Valley Podcast number 3, a conversation with State Representative candidate Richard Altavito for the 96th District here in Ohio. You can catch these conversations on the internetarchive.org. They are free downloads. Just check out Ohio Valley Podcast. You could also watch these on YouTube. Just search also Ohio Valley Podcast. This is, like I said, this is number 3, and today's topic is the opioid crisis. And on the side note, if you hear a cat meowing in the background, that's one of Richard's cats, Toby. He's kind of ticked off. There's no cats on the ballot. So, if you hear him meowing, we are not strangling the cat. Okay. Richard, how are you?
Very good tonight, Carmen. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Toby, you want to say a few words?
I think he's just purring.
He's just purring. Toby's like, get that thing out of my face. Okay. Jokes aside, we do have a serious topic for tonight, the opioid crisis. This is something that I'm sure most of us have seen something on the news. This is a problem that affects all 50 states, no matter what background you are from. I've never seen anything like it. I do remember as a kid growing up in Brooklyn, Richard, I never heard of these super drugs like fentanyl and whatever else, is out there. So we'll talk about that tonight. First of all, tell us briefly, how's the campaign going?
I feel good about things. I feel confident, and I appreciate the response that we're getting from all different areas of the district, and people seem to be very tuned in, and I think they're getting more aware. But of course, as a presidential year, I think people were paying attention to the election cycle this time a little bit more than usual. But I feel good at this point in time.
Okay, good. All right. Well, boy, where do we start with this? I remember seeing a report last year, I think it was on PBS, and I think the so-called, I don't know what else to call it, but I guess we call fentanyl the super drug. I thought I saw where a tiny, minute amount can kill a person. Is this true?
Yeah, fentanyl, of course, is something like 150 to 250 times more potent than heroin, and heroin itself is a dangerous drug, of course, a class 1. But there's another one even higher than that they're finding they've been lacing called carfentanil, and that's even 100 times more than fentanyl, or maybe even 1,000 times more, and that's an elephant tranquilizer. But and they're even finding that in our system. But fentanyl is definitely, according to the latest data and the searches in Ohio, at least, it's actually starting to show up in crystal meth or methamphetamine mixes and heroin mixes, and therefore that's what's making it so dangerous. It's the dual combining of the mixing of these two that's causing most of the overdose now in Ohio, from what I understand. The one I add to that is, let me start off a little bit at the beginning. I think, as we see in the litigation that's going on with some of the drug companies, and particularly Purdue Pharma that created OxyContin, what we found out in the fall of last year by the release of court documents is that 400,000 people have died in America since from 2010 to 2016, and that was just in that year, and that doesn't include the last 3 years. So the data is telling that's just the deaths, not the lives that have been impacted. They're estimating somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20, 30 million lives have been touched by and as they're saying, this particular crisis makes it a unique crisis, and even you have to give President Trump some credit for when he came into office, he put some attention on it. He didn't declare a national emergency. A lot of people thought they were going to, but I think it does demand all of our attention. And I know the senators from Ohio, both senators and others, have held conferences, congressional discussions have taken place. I don't know, the thing that I have about this crisis right now for the Ohio Valley and the Ohio region is that our first responders and the courts and the care centers, you might say the rehab centers that we have, I think they're overburdened by it. And even though there's been some grants, we're not getting the kinds of funds that have been talked about by others. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of attention that's been paid to the fact that so many people have overdosed in the Ohio Valley. Right here in Jefferson County, the data was released through those lawsuits that 27 million Oxycontin pills were released by one pharmacy in Jefferson County alone in 1 year, or I'm sorry, in 4 years. 27 million Oxycontin pills were prescribed. They were prescribed.
It's a lot.
And that was one pharmacy. So we only have between 60 to 70,000 residents, and I don't do the math. It's phenomenal that we have. No wonder we have so many people addicted to. They start with pain medication, and it goes to other things like heroin.
Just to backtrack real quick, did you say that people are buying a drug that's an elephant tranquilizer?
It is a elephant tranquilizer. Now, people aren't necessarily buying that drug; they're getting it by being mixed in. They don't even know they're taking it. That's the danger of the streets, and that's what happens. They don't even know this stuff is being placed in there. Some people are buying fentanyl straight up, knowing what they're looking for, but fentanyl is dangerous enough, and yet that gets laced oftentimes into other drugs that people are buying, and then they overdose from the fentanyl.
That is unreal. I didn't know that one. I know there are a multitude of reasons why some people get hooked on these, either drugs that are illegal or not. Maybe someone gets hurt, a coal miner gets hurt, he can't go back to work, he gets hooked on drugs, and this, moves on maybe to family members. There are many, many reasons, but what do you see as some of the top reasons why someone gets caught in the trap?
Well, I think the statistics show that over 60% of all heroin addicts in today's crisis started off of pain medication addiction. And what happened is well documented that they were injured or they were in surgery or maybe even suffering a severe illness with a lot of pain. And what happened was the Oxycontin was plentifully dispensed. So it was given under the guise that it wasn't addictive, which is amazing in itself. And that's why there's litigation over Oxycontin today. But once the Oxycontin was then found to be so addictive, they took it off the market or they made it harder. What happened, those people still had the addiction to the painkiller. So heroin flooded the gap, and it's cheaper. A pill would go for $30 on the street. Heroin, $30 of heroin will last them for a day. So what happened was the heroin came in behind the pain medication, but you're talking about 60, 70, they estimate 60 to 70% of the people that are doing heroin in the days that was the top drug a few years ago, it started out on Oxycontin or some pain meds, like you said, from surgery, from an injury. And what's interesting, it affected all levels of society. Back in the 90s, they did a unfortunate thing by labeling minority community as a crack community. And the response to that was prison, jail time, and really looking down on, quote unquote, the crack addict. Today, I think one odd side effect of this massive crisis is that people are getting away from that. Even conservative commentators are realizing that this is more not something you can arrest your way out of. You cannot arrest your way out of this crisis. You obviously have to have law enforcement. You can't have people selling narcotics, but you're not going to arrest your way out of a crisis where there's 10, 20 million people addicted. Yeah, right. And we don't have that kind of prison system.
Right.
And more importantly, it's really being recognized as a disease. Right. And while it's a matter of will to a certain extent, we have to have more funding for what I would specifically call medically assisted treatment. And that is not necessarily always supported by, and it isn't necessarily supported in our regions particularly. I know this because I have some personal experience with people that I know and friends and acquaintances and other family members of theirs. And I've heard by reading articles that our area does not have what they call medically assisted treatment openly provided, whereas in, say, larger cities like Columbus, Pittsburgh, Dayton, where they had very serious impacts of overdoses, they begin to use medicine along with counseling. A lot of the times what we'll do, what's been done in the past, somebody will get caught, they'll put them in a program, and it's almost like a AA program. And they're trying to just counsel their way out, or put them in jail for a while, let them so-called dry out. What studies have shown, and the doctors' research shows, the medical research shows that you just don't get rid of heroin out of your system by going to jail for 20 days. Heroin goes into the cells, every cell, according to the doctors I've spoken with personally, and it stays in the system for up to a year.
Wow.
Even if they stop, it's in literally every cell of their body. So the withdrawal reaction, which keeps the person from wanting to come off of it, is so intense it affects their entire organs, body, every system in the body. That's why it's such a difficult withdrawal process. And so once you get in, fentanyl is just 10 times or 100 times worse than that. What we're seeing, though, I will also add, we're missing one important one for our region, which is meth. And meth is now taking over the place of a lot of the heroin in our regions, because the rural area seems to be flooded with methamphetamines. And that's a whole nother type of addiction, but it's also just equally as serious.
So it seems like the cure, maybe not the cure itself, but one of the steps towards curing this crisis is compassion.
I think that's the only way. That's the leading way, is compassionate viewing, changing our ways of thinking about what is addiction. If anybody's ever even read what a family goes through when they have a loved one that's in addiction, it's just heartbreaking. Millions of people have experienced that around the country, and of course tens of thousands in our district have. And Portsmouth, Ohio is a little bit out of our immediate district, but it's in the congressional district. Washington Post did a series of articles on Portsmouth, and recently I think PBS did a story, and New York Times did a story on Portsmouth, and they quoted a lot of the people who were coming through the addiction and coming out of it on the backside. They labeled it the disease of despair, where you have a lot of another interesting study happened that in Lordstown recently, they did a study after the closing of the Lordstown plant, and the addiction rates shot through the roof. When people find despair and their hopelessness kicks in, and there's lack of jobs, lack of infrastructure, you see addiction, people turning towards drugs. And there's a direct correlation. So it isn't necessarily something to be punitive about in the original approach and the primary motive. It has to be something done with compassion and even a more of a medically understood approach. What does addiction do to the body? The chemistry of it. And once you understand the chemistry of it, I think people will be a lot less willing to judge people.
It's almost like the people use the drugs as an escape because there's no one acting as a voice for them. The system is not working for them. Absolutely.
And when you're talking to people who have been in addiction, that's exactly what they describe. It could be a brokenness in a marriage, a family, something that's happened in their past, an abuse, but also very much so a loss of a job, a loss of income, stress, the strain of what it is to be financially strapped. And that's why southeastern Ohio is a prime area, Youngstown, Dayton. We've had some real problems in Ohio. I think we're the second, if not at least we're the top 3 or 4 states in the country when it comes to overdose and drug. We have to do better in Ohio. And I know there's been a lot of attention paid, but we need to get the actual dollars working for the addicts. My view is it's one thing to put money into the system to beef up, say, the probation departments or the EMT, and that's all great. But we got to get some of the settlement money. They're talking about $1 billion in settlements from suing the pharmaceutical makers. We got to get that money not necessarily just to the hospitals, not to the insurance companies, that we have to get it literally to the treatment centers. It costs a lot to put someone through a full-blown rehab. You can't put them in the hospital for 10 days or jail for 30 days and expect it to overcome this. This is not that kind of a thing. So we don't have, while we have very dedicated people and we have some very good services in Belmont and Jefferson County providing alternatives, I don't think if you talk to the community that is affected, you'll find that they really don't have the kinds of facilities that some places do. And I think we could do a lot better. And that's what I like to do if I get elected.
Okay.
I like to focus on bringing those dollars to this valley to make a very concerted medically assisted treatment approach to this. They call it MAT. And to do that, to bring and working with the judges and the court systems together and the other rehab centers, but we got to specifically get the medicine that's necessary to keep people from going back onto the harder substances.
So it sounds like what we need is a balanced approach.
Exactly, and you said it right there. It's one thing, you do need some stick, but you also need the carrot. And the stick is important to keep someone from, you just can't let people go to the nth degree. The ultimate result is death or compromised life at the least. But at the same time, oftentimes what I see in working with folks that have been affected, there's so much tension that's created by that. They're always worried about falling off the cart. They're worried about if they're going to foul up. And if they foul up, they might go back to jail. That in itself brings its own stress trigger back to the person. It's a psychological trigger. So what do? They go out and they try to self-medicate that stress, that anxiety. It's almost like they build in the system right now by approaching it through a punitive measures, almost builds in the addiction. So what I see that can happen, one thing I know from working with a Pittsburgh physician on this a little bit and talking to him, Dr. Clark, who's been rated one of the best in the Pittsburgh region for working with recovery addicts, he has said that he's also the one that explained the chemistry about how long the substances take to come out of your system. Even when you're in full recovery, it still takes a year for the substance to come out of one of your body's cells and organs. That opened my eyes to it isn't just the willpower of the individual. It's literally a chemistry that has to be drained out of your system. So the way to do that is to offer medicine that will help them to overcome that craving. And if they don't have that, one thing we found by working with Dr. Clark's office is literally it's almost impossible to find the medicine that's given in Pittsburgh, and at least all over Pittsburgh and various pharmacies. You will not find it in Jefferson County. You cannot get it in Jefferson County.
None of it.
None of it. The only place I know that gave it out was near Barnesville, and another place. One other place was in Mingo, but that was shut down.
Is it because the law is preventing that, or?
I'm not sure what the reasons is, and the substance is known to people. They feel it's a narcotic substance, but it's specifically designed not to get people high, and you can get dependent like any drug, but it's not the same kind of dependency that a heroin or meth will do. It's called Subutex. You will not find that in any major pharmacy in Steubenville or Jefferson County. You have to go across the river to Pittsburgh, and yet he's having recovery rates of 70-80% with people on this.
80%?
Yes. And they have to stay on it, though, for about 2 years, and then they wean themselves off of that, and they can come off of it. But it's literally a chemical, molecular structure that does not allow the person to get high. So they don't have the euphoric experience. Therefore, now some people get dependent on it, and maybe that's why Ohio right now is looking down on it. That's why it's not looked upon. But when you're choosing between using heroin in the streets or using fentanyl-laced cocaine versus a prescribed medicine that doctors can give out, FDA-prescribed medicine, it's a big difference.
Because one is controlled and safe and the other is not.
Exactly.
Right.
And you can find it in 16 different places in Pittsburgh's pharmacies, Walmart, Target, and many other places. But we can't find it here in Jefferson County, which I think is really kind of unusual. So it's something I want to look into. Maybe there's a good explanation for it. But I know this personally from working with a recovery clinic in Pittsburgh. Not for myself, by the way, but for others.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: based on your experience, is this something as our representative that you can propose a bill in Columbus?
Yeah. I certainly intend to do that. I want to explore it. I want to talk to doctors, pharmacists, and see why Southeastern Ohio has been sort of cut out of this market of Subutex and Suboxone. Now, I know Suboxone's available. That's a little bit different. There's a story behind it. I think I understand what they're trying to worried about, but I don't understand it from the point of the view, again, of being compassionate to the people that are most affected, which is the addicted. And I think it works. I know there's like any drug that has a narcotic base to it, it could end up being in the street. It can end up being somewhat abused. But Subutex, again, is built in, and I've dealt with people who have been on it. It does not produce a high. It does stop the withdrawal effects, and that's why it's so effective. They can stay on Subutex, and they can stay on it for some time. And what it does, it prevents them from getting the withdrawal symptoms that would trigger them to go back out in the street to buy heroin. It sounds like a pretty good option. It may not be perfect, but it's certainly better than having people doing what they call the heroin run. And anybody who's been in the addiction cycle or has a family member or a friend has been doing that, they know exactly the hell that produces in their life every day. Anthony Bourdain, the famous chef, said he had a heroin addiction, and he said, I know what it was like to wake up every day. The first thing on my mind was what I had to do to get through the day. And that's what every person who's been addicted to heroin or fentanyl or cocaine-laced fentanyl or heroin, with cocaine laced with those drugs, do every day.
Wow.
Become cycled around that.
I mean, you multiply this by, millions of people across 50 states. Let me just say that if somebody out there knows someone, or maybe you are, or know someone who has a problem, let them know that there are solutions, that someone, at least here, is listening.
Yes.
And will be a voice. So, point him to this podcast, Ohio Valley Podcast, and to Richard's Facebook page. We are the 96th. We know what's out there. Like I said, I've done a little bit of research on this, not as much as Richard, but it sounds like, man, I keep going back to the elephant thing. Wow.
It's one of the dangers of the street, and as having practiced law in the field of criminal defense, I saw it back in 2003, 2004. The Oxycontin pill began to flood the streets. And I wondered then, as an attorney and representing it, it just took over the practice. It wasn't cocaine anymore. It wasn't crack as much. It was Oxycontin. Everybody was selling oxys or getting high on Oxycontin. Yeah. Very powerful synthetic heroin, created for cancer treatment, really, and surgical, post-surgical pain relief. What happened was we recognized this wasn't coming in from Mexico. This wasn't coming in from China. This was being made in labs in America. So it was strange to me that we had so much of this flooding the streets. So what I began to see, and skipping 10, 12, 14 years later, we have a heroin epidemic. We have a drug opiate epidemic, and now what you're getting is coming in from China, coming in from Mexico. You're seeing these lacings happening with carfentanil and fentanyl. People, the classic thing of addiction is that it wears off. Your brain can only take so much of that drug before it levels up, and what happens is they need a bigger and bigger high. They're looking for that bigger high. So the fentanyl and the carfentanil gives you that bang. It also can put you out of this world instantly.
You want the next big step, the next level. But you're right. I was going to mention that some of the research I did, the fentanyl comes out of China, if I remember, out of China to a port in Vancouver.
That's what the original fentanyl ports seem to be, the trade seems to be. And I'm hearing somewhat now from some federal prosecutors, it's been shifting a little bit, coming now the cartels out of Mexico are starting to trade with China. And they're also producing it. So there's a competition, of course, at those levels. It's phenomenal to think that at one point fentanyl really wasn't a scheduled drug. It was just a pain patch. And there were people who were given fentanyl pain patches for pain, shoulder pain. Major athletes had it late in life. My brother-in-law was on fentanyl patches in Connecticut because he played football in college.
Yeah.
So it was a pain control, but easily abused because of, just like heroin, it's an opiate base, get addicted. But the dangerous thing is what you're describing. The key thing about the street is it's not controlled. And when someone goes out and meets a dealer in the middle of the night and somebody's selling them something in the back of an alley or in the back of a car or maybe in a restaurant, they don't really know what they're getting. It could be anything. And that's where so many heartbreaking stories of a kid used at a party for the first time and he dies. It's happened because he thought he was buying quote unquote Coke and the Coke was laced with fentanyl and he dies that night because his system cannot handle that.
Right. Well, I can tell you as a kid growing up in Brooklyn and the streets, now this is before the internet and Facebook, yes. I can tell you that back then, as far as street rules, there weren't any.
Right.
And now it seems like it's worse because technology makes it easier to acquire these drugs.
Oh, absolutely. And the connections are on Facebook and it's promoted through social media. I mean, it's so easy. The cell phone is the key thing the officers want.
Sure.
When police find somebody, the first thing they want to confiscate is their cell phone because they can find. And in a way, that's kind of a law enforcement tool.
Sure.
Leaving one of the other dangers, and I know it needs to be brought out, is the danger to law enforcement and to first responders is that touching carfentanil, if you're not if you're not already in an addiction status, your tolerance is zero to those substances. So if you touch it, it comes through your system.
That's crazy.
It's an immediate impact to you. And some people have even been, I think, even died. A few first responders have even died by just touching carfentanil. So it's a very dangerous system. The other hand is the meth. I'm leaving meth out a little bit.
Yeah.
But meth is created by toxic substances that are so powerful, like toxic detergents, lithium battery extracts. It goes into the creation of methamphetamine, crystal meth, ice blue meth. Reason why I just did some research. The reason why they call ice blue or the blue meth, that's because it's gun bluey. It's the stuff that they put on guns to make them turn them blue. The actual dye of the metal. That's what goes into methamphetamine mixes. So you're putting that substance in your body. People, and that's why eventually they end up seeing aliens coming down in their backyard.
Oh, boy.
Methamphetamine, to me, is overtaking our area in a way that's dangerous because it does produce violence. And that doctors and the science has said, unlike heroin, unlike fentanyl, which usually is just a depressant, it creates its own crime factors. The actual methamphetamine use can actually turn people extremely violent. And they tend to react off a drop of a hat. So methamphetamine is nothing simple, and it's easily made, but it's made in the backyards and the back streets, and it's not necessarily coming in from Mexico.
Right.
It's dangerous, and the substances you're putting in your body literally can turn your skin black. I've had people tell me personally while they were on it, they thought they were growing scales like an alligator. Not that they were perceiving that. And I've had people tell me while they're on meth that they were seeing literally small aliens running around their yard. So it produces some very bizarre strengths. Now, people doing it, they get an extreme energetic buzz from it for a minute, and then it falls away.
Right.
It's, again, to me, it's our area. I think that article in the New York Times, and it was echoed by the Washington Post, when they said it was a disease of despair, I think it affects our valleys so much because there's not a lot for the youth to do. So there's a lot of things we need to deal with.
Well, and you can multiply a situation like this in all 50 states.
All 50 states, all across Ohio, in all socioeconomic backgrounds, wealthy and wealthy elite circles or socioeconomic statuses on down to or distressed neighborhoods and areas and rural areas that don't have a lot of employment. Even when you have top Republican conservative politicians like Chris Christie in New Jersey saying we can't do this by arresting people, and this is a disease.
Yes.
When you have New Hampshire and you have states like Maine, or very conservative states typically, realizing that they got an epidemic at the level that they have it, where every one of their towns is under pressure from this epidemic. when you have people dying in West Virginia at the rates that they were, 10,000 people have died in West Virginia in so many 2 years from overdoses, you have a very serious public health crisis. To me, more people have died. I think it's something like 20 times more people have died in this epidemic than we have died in the Afghanistan, Iraq wars.
Because it's just too easy to get something that is not controlled.
Absolutely. And, hats off to those limited resources that a lot of times the smaller communities have, like Steubenville.
Well, obviously it's dangerous to get a hold of any type of substance where there's no control, there's no type of regulation. It's almost like a free fall. It's almost like a bar fight where like everybody's drunk and you just don't know who's going to get hurt or maybe not survive.
Oh, that's the problem. It's too easy to access today. It's in the high schools. It's in shopping malls. It's in the shopping mall parking lots. There was a story that in Denver, Colorado, I'm just talking about out of the state now, that most of the DEA agents were saying the dealers were actually targeting the upper scale, high shopping mall areas where they would do the transactions. It wasn't being done in the back alleys. It was done in the upscale restaurants, the upscale mall, parking lots, and that was their clientele. It was the upscale people with money. So this is a problem that targets all levels of society. And in our area, it can be found, I'm told, as simple as walking down the street at a given time of night at every corner. And I'm not criticizing the police. I think there's been a great deal of effort by police and by law enforcement to get this problem. The judges are certainly aware of it. I know there's a drug court has been started in both counties, in Belmont and Jefferson, I think, I'm sure Monroe. The issue becomes, though, it's an overwhelming problem for law enforcement.
It's too much. Yeah.
Too much is stress is laid on the court system, the jails. And again, well, I do think there needs to be funds and cooperation between the DEA and the feds and the local authorities, and there is some of that happening. There needs to be perhaps more focus on what they call the pipelines, the big, and not so much on the quote unquote end dealer or the street dealer. You have to do it at both sides, no question. Illegal activity is illegal activity. But I'm sure, and I'm not working as a defense lawyer inside the federal system for a while, I was able to work with top drug interdiction prosecutors and DEA agents. And I listened to some of the discussions, and I was party to them working with these issues. And I had a chance one time to bring an individual who was he had a contract out on his life because he was a part of a lieutenant of a ring. And when he came in out under the cold, so to speak, and we got him in, I was thanked by the DEA agents for bringing him in off the streets because they said we may have saved some of their lives getting him off the street.
Wow.
And so doing that kind of work defense-wise, I then was educated by listening to what he had to say, this client.
Yeah.
And what he had to say was just stunning to all of us, which was, tens of thousands of dollars worth of drugs were oftentimes on them. And he was going on airplanes and flying from LA to Cleveland. And but what they were doing, which was that particular prosecution, was an interesting prosecution, which they were going after a major pipeline. They knew about it, and they went after the top people.
They wanted the big fish.
The big fish. And I think that's where the resources have to be focused law enforcement wise. At the same time, I've met and I've known numerous law enforcement officers in the Valley. Of course, Sheriff Abadella, we all know Sheriff, and I know he's done a tremendous job trying to get at this problem. And but he himself has said, we're not going to eradicate it by arresting everybody. They can't do it. And we have to find a solution that's
balanced.
A balanced solution. We're going to go after the drug dealers. We have to go after the illegal activity, but we have to find a solution on the demand.
Right. All right. Well, obviously, we could probably talk about this all day, and maybe if we can schedule a town hall meeting before the primary, we can have people show up, maybe ask more questions to clarify, or maybe some possible more solutions.
I plan to do that, and I do look forward to scheduling that, and we'll do that soon.
Okay.
And
cool.
I would like to just say to the public, if anybody is listening to this and they do want to talk, feel free to contact our website or even the email. And I have numbers we can get to you if you want to. We can direct you to help.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. On that thought, let's end it here. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this topic or any other, as far as the podcast goes, you can send an email at ohiovalleypodcast@gmail.com. And as far as contacting Richard, there are many ways. Richard, why don't you give us a brief list of how to contact you?
Well, of course, I have my Facebook site is Rich Olavito. It's just a plain Facebook site. But then there's my campaign site is We Are the 96, as you mentioned, on Facebook. And then my email is mccr1983@gmail.com. That's the simplest and most direct route to get to me. And then we have a couple group sites that are on Facebook that are linked into those sites, and others we just appreciate if you want to reach out. Of course, just reach out through the Facebook or to the social media, and even these podcasts, and my email should be probably the best and most direct route to get to me. Okay. I would welcome anybody who wants to join our campaign. We welcome you. We certainly reach out to you. And this campaign is about people and grassroots effort. We're trying to reach to be mainly the voice for the Valley. That's what we call it, the We Are the 96.
Yes.
We are the 96. It's not Rich Olavito. I'm not the only we can't change things. We can't make a difference unless we have the participation of our democracy,
right? Which
is our citizens of our Valley.
Okay, so real briefly, first of all, the donation website is...
It's a GoFundMe site, and I have that as again under the We Are the 96th, and that would be linked to both the sites as again. And I do have an Act Blue account, and that again is under the same committee name.
Okay.
And then and certainly as we're coming through the area, and hopefully you'll see us reach out to us. I will put a telephone number out there if you want to call us. That's 740-381-5935.
Okay. All right. Many ways to reach our next representative for We Are the 96. It sounds like Richard knows exactly what he needs to do. Maybe in the future podcast, I can press him for some campaign promises. Not yet, but we'll try and keep this as real and as honest as possible. All right. Well, I want to thank Richard for joining me again for this. I'm still thinking about the elephant track. Well, I just can't get out of my head. I mean, I don't want to make light of this, but
no, it's not. But at the same time, it shows you the risk in anybody who, unfortunately, people have died from that. From just touching it. At the same thing, some people are looking for that greater and greater high, and I don't think they realize what they're dealing with. It's a sad part of the addiction and the crisis we're in. Many people just. Like you said, want to escape reality.
Right.
Let's see if we can create a better environment for them so they can have jobs, they can have a future, and see activities for the youth.
Right.
I think if we do that as a valley and we produce a better environment for the young adults and for all the job situation, we will see a reduction in this crisis as well.
All right. I guess we can end it here. Anyway, on that note, we will end this Ohio Valley Podcast number 3, and catch us for Ohio Valley Podcast number 4. I think we'll talk about what to do with the Four Stupid Mall, maybe on a lighter note. So I have a few solutions myself, actually, as a voter, and I will press Richard for that. So, Richard, thank you again.
Thank you, and I appreciate the time, and we'll just listen to us the next time.
All right. On that note, I'll just say arrivederci.